My wife told me today, first thing in the morning, she said, "So you're going with the homeless look today?" And I was like, "Dang, it's too early to try me like that." But personally, I think I'm evolving into my best form via quarantine. Um, Clearly up for debate. Anyway, a little insight into my life. Okay, chapter 6 and 7. Before we jump into that, I wanted to put up the chart that we're going to continue using. You don't actually have to circle this. This is just me highlighting it. I think it's important to remind ourselves periodically as we read this text that Lewis, I really believe, is trying to highlight life before death and not life after death. That the choice we're making now is that we're all living in a twilight, an in-between period, life in the mist. And the choice that we have is, are we going to live in a twilight that fades into night when we die, representing night? Or are we going to live in a twilight that fades into day, right? When we die, the twilight finally becoming day. And so the ghosts and the solid people, the characters that we see interacting, I think are meant to represent us. It's meant to represent like a conversation between you and a friend, a conversation between me and a friend, any conversation between a believer and an unbeliever. And the choice that we have now during our time on earth is that we're in a twilight, but which twilight do we want to live in? And that's that fork in the road that we see on the road map in the back of class, is that we're all faced with that choice of, do I want to live in the high countries or do I want to live in the gray town? And so it's important to remind ourselves that I don't think Lewis actually believes that after death you'll have a choice. I think Lewis is using this story to represent the choice that we have now. Do we want to be a ghost or do we want to be solid? So just a good reminder as we read onward. Chapter 6, we get the apple ghost. He's also the character in chapter 2. His name's Ike. When C.S. Lewis was on the bus talking to the tussle-headed poet, he also had a brief conversation with the guy named Ike who came and sat next to him, was like, the problem with hell is that there's no supply and demand. If you want a house, you think a house and you got it. He said, but if I could bring back a real quantity, if I could bring back something that was limited but substantial, I think I could fix this place. I think I could get some supply and demand going. I think I could start a business. I think I could start a society. And so we see with him, he's kind of a businessman in a sense. And the chapter starts with C.S. Lewis. He steps on the river. The river, he's a ghost, and the river is solid because it's heaven, and it's just that more real and tangible. And so he drifts down the river and then eventually steps off, and he's in this place with this waterfall and this lake surrounded by bushes. And he has this interesting thing where he says he could hear the waterfall completely. And he said it sounded like giants laughing. I think what he's getting at here is this idea of our senses now are so muddled. Again, that's life in the mist. We can't see the full picture. We can't hear the full picture. We get glimpses of things, but we don't see it completely. And he's representing that in heaven, we will understand fully. And so he hears fully in this sense. He hears the waterfall for the very first time, not as this muddled roar, but as giants laughing. And he looks over and he sees behind the bushes, he sees his friend from the bus from chapter 2, Ike, who's hiding behind a bush. And then he periodically looks around and runs to another bush and dives behind it and hides. And it's a really good representation of darkness being frightened by the light. Very similar to what we've seen with The Hobbit, similar to what we saw with Princess and the Goblin, similar to what we saw with Allegory of the Cave. All of those things where darkness loves darkness, where sin does not want to be seen. Sin does not want to be exposed. And so he's hiding. There's a sense of being seen. He says, or it says, all the time he was apparently haunted by the terror of discovery. I think it represents all of us well, is that the hide in all of us, to reference Jekyll and Hyde, doesn't want to be exposed. Darkness loves the shadows and does not want to be seen. And I think we all resonate with that to a certain extent. But anyway, his goal is that he could take something from heaven and bring it back. And so he tries to pick up these apples. He can't do it. The apples fall on him, and he's like crushed for a little bit because they're so much more substantial than he is. And there's a great quote from chapter 5 where it says, reality is harsh to the feet of shadows. So the reality in this sense, like an allegory of the cave, the light, it hurts for the escaping prisoner. And so the reality in this sense is so much more real and so much more tangible that it's also heavy and painful to the feet of these phantoms. And so he's trying to pick up this apple, and he finally gets one little apple that he can pick up. He's trying to bring it back to hell so he can make a quick buck. And then the waterfall speaks. And this waterfall angel spirit thing says you cannot take it back. There is not room for it in hell. And I'm not sure exactly why Lewis has the waterfall say this, or the spirit of the waterfall, or it's like an angel in a crucified position. My best guess is that in Luke 19, in the Gospel of Luke, there's the story of when Jesus enters Jerusalem, and the Pharisees tell him to tell everyone to stop cheering. And Jesus replies and says, if I were to be silent, even the rocks would cry out. And so there's this idea of that nature itself is shouting the name of God, is worshiping, is praising. And so maybe what's going on here, my best guess is that the waterfall, nature is crying out. In heaven, this is realized. This is no longer, just an imagination. This is real. And so this waterfall spirit says, you fool, put it down. You can't bring back any of hell to heaven. And it's a good reminder of what we saw in the preface to the text, which was that good and evil, darkness and light, heaven and hell, ghosts and solids, however you want to put it, it's a great divorce. You can't have both. But if you choose heaven, you have to completely give up hell. You have to become solid. If you decide you want to stay in the gray town, if you want to choose hell, you're not going to be able to bring back even a little bit of heaven. And so I think it's a good reminder of the title of the book, which is his premise, which is that there's a fork in the road and you can't have both. And Ike represents the person who's like, oh, well, if I could, I'm going to use my own religion for personal gain, right? His goal here is to make a little money, to start a business in hell. And so he wants to take a little bit of heaven, but he still wants to live in the gray town where he can make some money and he can benefit himself in that way. And this waterfall ghost reminds him, no, it's a great divorce. If you want to choose hell, you can't take even a little bit of heaven with it. So then we get to the hard-bitten ghost in chapter 7. He's a guy who's kind of leaning up against a tree. He's kind of has this smirk on his face of, you fool. All of you are fools thinking you could actually stay here. I'm just here to visit. That's what he tells C.S. Lewis when C.S. Lewis goes and talks to him. He says, I'm just here to see it for myself. And he's a character that I also resonate with to a certain extent. He just feels very jaded, very cynical. He feels like everyone's been taken, that all the religions are really just, ways to get you to believe in something that's not true. The church is just out there to make some money. The school system's just trying to exploit you. The government is just trying to use you. And so he's gotten to this point where he's just like, it's all a sham. It's all a sham. And C.S. Lewis says, well, why are you here? And he says, I'm here just to look around. I just want to see it for myself, kind of laugh at it. And he has this funny quote on page 52 where he says, a human being couldn't live here. He's like, look around. You think you could actually stay? You couldn't live here. And to a certain extent, he's right. The human beings, the ghosts as they are, couldn't live here. It takes being reborn. It takes becoming solid. And that's a painful process, as we'll see. But like Scripture says, right, to enter into the kingdom of heaven, you need to have the heart of a child. You need to be reborn. And so the irony of the statement is that he's exactly right. A human being couldn't live here. And he also says, people have been telling me that sort of thing all my life. They've been saying that if you just go to school, school will get easier. If you just work hard enough, you'll be happy. If you just have enough money, you'll be happy. If you just read the Bible more, all your doubts will go away. If you just pray enough, all your doubts will go away. And he's like, it's not true. It's all a sham. Uh, it's really, no, it's not true. And he's also kind of a conspiracy theorist. He uh, he thinks it's all run by the same group. He doesn't say what that group is, but he's like, it's all a conspiracy. He says, entirely new management, eh? Don't you believe it? It's never a new management. You'll always find the same old ring. So he doesn't say if it's God or if it's Allah or if it's some higher being or if God doesn't even exist. He's like the church, the government, religion, politics, it's all working together and just exploiting us, just using us. And we're fools to buy into it. So he's such a cynic. He's just so frustrated at the way things are that he's decided, I don't want any of it. And I'm reading a book right now called Faith and Doubt by John Ortberg. And it's a really good book. And he uses the analogy of that we're all floating in this stormy sea of uncertainty. And some people choose a boat and they try and they hope that that's the right boat. Some people choose a belief system, Christianity or Islam, something, atheism even, something to where like this is what the truth is. I'm gonna try and ride out this boat in the sea of uncertainty. Other people say, screw it, and they jump ship. They say we're never gonna find answers. It's all a joke. We're being played, and jump ship and drown. And they're okay with that. And I think the hard-bitten ghost represents that, right? He's just hard-bitten. He's a cynic. He's like, it's all a joke, right? We're never going to figure it out. We're all being played. And he's so frustrated with that. But he's not willing to take a chance and say, what if I'm wrong? He's like, we're all wrong. But in a weird way, he's also entitled, which is the irony of this guy, is that he says, if they, meaning the management, he doesn't clarify who that is, he says if they wanted to rescue us, they could do it. It's up to the new management to find something that doesn't bore us, isn't it? It's their job. And so he has this sense of, well, if there is a God, why doesn't he come down and fix things? Which, I've heard even some of y'all say this year. It's a common question. If there is a God, if he's the management, why doesn't he come fix things? Come fix it. But he's not willing to take personal responsibility to say, well, instead of jumping overboard, maybe I need to pick a boat. Maybe I need to pick a boat that will take me to the further shore. And so he's so frustrated. He's like, it's all a joke. We're all being played. And his desires are, well, his biggest fear, I think, is his fear of being taken. His fear of being wrong. His fear of being proved, you're a fool, we got you. Whoever we is, God, government, church, the school system. His biggest fear is that he'll be proven wrong. But at the same time, it's like he also wants other people to solve his problems. He wants other people to tell him, here's what you need to do. He wants management to solve his issues. And so he's a tricky ghost because part of us, I think, resonates with that frustration at times of not being given clear answers. But he's also someone who doesn't want to take the risk of looking for answers. He's given up. Instead of saying, he's kind of like the ghost in chapter 5. He says, well, we can't figure it out, so I'm going to go back and keep looking. When maybe the answers are right in front of him. So he's the hard-bitten ghost. If you can't quite wrap your mind around him, he's a little bit difficult to pin down, even for me. But he's the cynic. He's baited. He's frustrated, and so he thinks it's all a joke. And his biggest fear is being proven wrong. Is being fooled, and finding out that he was fooled. So let's add to the theme list. If the big man showed us that to stay in the high country requires a giving up of self, requires a sacrificing of rights. In chapter 3, the bishop and the seeker in chapter 5, chapter 4, the bishop and the seeker in chapter 5 shows us that to stay in the high country requires accepting answers. Requires to an extent saying, I'm a seeker, but here are the answers and I'm going to accept them. It requires, while still maintaining that respect for mystery, saying Jesus is the solution to that mystery. And to stay in the high country requires accepting that. The apple ghost in chapter 6 shows that to stay requires giving up personal gain. It requires saying, you know what, I'm not going to try and take a little bit of heaven and make some money back in hell. I'm not going to use my religion uh, for my own personal gain. And honestly, maybe I shouldn't say this, but it reminds me a lot of mainstream pastors that are selling these health and wealth gospel books that are not biblical at all, and they're using their religion to make a buck down in hell. I think the apple ghost represents something like that. And then the hard bitten ghost, I think he shows us that to stay requires risking being perceived as a fool. It requires a risk of being perceived as a fool. Uh, Anytime you adhere to a certain belief system, there is the risk that people will look at you and say you're an idiot, especially Christianity. And we saw that, well, not with Christianity, but we saw the idea of that with an enemy of the people. That when you have the truth, people are going to mock you. People are going to say you're an idiot, you're a fool for believing this. And the hard-bitten ghost wasn't willing to take that risk. He said, it's all a sham. We're all being taken, and I'm not willing uh, to put all my eggs in one basket. I'm not willing to jump on a boat. Instead, I'm gonna float until I drown in the sea of uncertainty, and it's not a risk he's willing to take. So, two characters that possibly you resonate with, or possibly you know someone who potentially resonates with that. And I think C.S. Lewis has given us some good reminders of things to be wary of and things we need to give up if we want to stay in the high